What if the Jedi joined Maul and killed Sidious? What would happen then? Let's find out. Also, quickly before we begin, the first section of this video until Palpatine dies is a summarized version of a different video I made, so if after watching this video you feel like getting a detailed view on what happened, do check out that video, a link to which I have left in the description. And with that being said, let's begin this video. So in this alternate Star Wars timeline, several things would have happened which led to Maul and the Jedi going after Sidious together. But the main catalyst for everything would be Anakin being a little more honest with Yoda while speaking of his premonitions. Instead of simply taking Yoda's advice and leaving, Anakin would tell Yoda, after some encouragement from the Grandmaster, that in his visions, Anakin saw Senator Amidala screaming in pain and dying. Hearing this, Yoda would tell Anakin that premonitions are not absolutes and that the future is in constant motion. Yoda would ultimately advise Anakin to meditate on his visions and to not let these visions affect his judgment. And following this, Yoda would also add that if Anakin were to get any more visions, he should let Yoda know. So ultimately, in this timeline, Anakin will leave Yoda's chambers with a renewed trust in the 900-year-old Grandmaster of the Jedi Order, and Yoda would decide that he would need to keep a closer eye on the Chosen One. So following Yoda's advice, Anakin would choose to meditate on his visions as he now believes them to be mere possibilities rather than absolutes. So the days would go by like this until Anakin gets another vision. In this one, instead of seeing Padme die like in the original timeline, Anakin would see Palpatine, who looked severely injured, calling out for help. And after seeing this, concerned for Palpatine's safety, Anakin would inform Yoda of this. Hearing this, Yoda would tell Anakin to continue his meditation. But this vision of Anakin's would leave Yoda puzzled, and Yoda's thoughts would go through several events, starting with how Dooku told Obi-Wan of how Darth Sidious controls the Senate, then to the incident with Clone Trooper CT-5555, or 5s where the Clone Trooper accused Palpatine of having something to do with the inhibitor chips and plans to destroy the Jedi, and after having thought of that incident, Yoda would then recall a vision that he himself had when he visited Dagobah. So side note, this happens in Season 6 of the Clone Wars, where essentially Qui-Gon's Force Ghost tells Yoda to go to Dagobah, and once there, Yoda gets this vision. And in this vision on Dagobah, Yoda had seen the Clone Troopers fighting and killing Jedi. And now coming back to the story, after going over all these events, Yoda would put all this together and arrive at the conclusion that Palpatine might be in league with Darth Sidious, or at least that there is some form of connection between the two. Yoda would then share all this with Obi-Wan and Mace, and then would tell them that he, Yoda, would immediately be returned to Coruscant after leaving Luminara in charge of Kashyyyk, because at this point Yoda would believe that the threat on Coruscant is bigger than the one on Kashyyyk, and Obi-Wan would also decide to return after dealing with Grievous. And it is also around this time that Ahsoka captures Maul on Mandalore. And in the original timeline, before Ahsoka could speak with Anakin, Sidious had executed Order 66. But here in this new timeline, things would take a different turn. So during Ahsoka's meeting with the Masters after Maul is captured, Yoda, who at this point is making his way back to Coruscant from Kashyyyk, while also believing that Sidious is somehow influencing Palpatine, would sense that Ahsoka had valuable information about Sidious which she was only willing to share with Anakin. Yoda sees this in the original timeline as well, but he does not inquire into it further. But here, due to the urgent nature of things, Yoda would decide that they need to know what this information is. And seeing as how Ahsoka was only willing to speak with Anakin, Yoda would request Mace to call Anakin back from whatever errand he was sent on. So side note, this meeting happens right after Mace sends Anakin to Palpatine's office to tell Palpatine of how Grievous has been found, which is where Palpatine reveals himself as a Sith to Anakin. So in this new timeline, upon Yoda's request, Mace would call Anakin back on an urgent matter before Anakin could reach Palpatine's office. So soon after this, Anakin and Ahsoka would be speaking, and Ahsoka would tell Anakin of how, according to Maul, Anakin is being manipulated into becoming Sidious's apprentice. Anakin of course would not believe this and would demand to speak with Darth Maul, which after a short while would be arranged via holoprojector. And after some back and forth between Maul and Anakin, Maul would reveal that Sidious is Palpatine. Hearing this, Anakin would go into denial, but Mace, along with Obi-Wan and Yoda, who by this point were back on Coruscant, would calm Anakin down, at which point Anakin would reveal that, according to Maul, Palpatine is Sidious. This revelation would essentially make all the puzzle pieces fall in place, especially after Anakin shared with the Masters the tragedy of Darth Plagueis, which Palpatine told Anakin. So this would essentially confirm to them that Palpatine and Sidious are not in league with each other, but are one and the same. And along with this, based on what Fives revealed before he was gunned down, the Jedi would also make the connection that Palpatine's plan is to use the clones against the Jedi. The inhibitor chips of the clones force them to follow certain commands, no matter what, as Fives had revealed. What if one such command is purge the Jedi? They realized So at this point, the Masters would summarize that Palpatine would act quick now, since Grievous is dead. But they would also see that Palpatine would not act before he has Anakin by his side, which gave them some time. But at the same time, the Jedi had a Maul problem. If Maul were to be brought to Coruscant, Palpatine might learn through Maul that the Jedi are onto him. So to avoid this, Obi-Wan would get the help of Bo-Katan Kryze, the regent of Mandalore at this point. Obi-Wan would tell Bo-Katan that the day Maul is brought to Coruscant, they need him out of prison. And without sharing much details with Bo-Katan, Obi-Wan would tell her that the issue is bigger than both of them, and that she kinda owes them for Mandalore, because Bo-Katan could not have taken Mandalore without the Republic's help. So Bo-Katan would ultimately relent and would send her Night Owls, who are a group of Mandalorians loyal only to Bo-Katan, to break Maul out. And they would be successful in doing so, but not without some hiccups and some collateral damage. But after they broke Maul out of prison, Maul would get away from the Night Owls before the Jedi could collect Maul. And in the end, this whole prison break operation would essentially be blamed on Death Watch, the ones who were loyal to Maul. So following this, the Jedi had two problems. They needed information on the inhibitor chips, and they also had to find Maul before Sidious did. Yoda, after analyzing the whole thing, would tell Obi-Wan that Maul wants to be found by the Jedi, and that at this point, Maul and the Jedi share a common goal. Yoda would instruct Obi-Wan that Obi-Wan would just need to make himself approachable in a place where Maul would not feel under threat. And so, following Yoda's advice, Obi-Wan would do so, and soon after, he would feel a dark presence following him through the streets of Coruscant. And having sensed this presence following him, Obi-Wan would walk into Dexter's diner and sit there, following which the dark presence would get closer, until Obi-Wan saw what looked like a homeless person standing in front of him. Maul was wearing a good disguise, perfect for hiding out in the streets of Coruscant, Obi-Wan would think. As for acquiring information on the inhibitor chips, Anakin, Ahsoka, who by this point had arrived on Coruscant, and R2-D2 would make a trip to Kamino under the guise of checking on the clone shipments. And while there, Kamino would be attacked by Death Watch, who wanted revenge on Ahsoka for capturing their leader. And unfortunately, Ahsoka would be taken away by Death Watch. And in all this commotion, with the help of Anakin, R2 would extract all the data the Kaminoans kept secret in their vault. So obviously the whole thing with Death Watch was another setup. It was meant to serve as a distraction while R2 extracted all the data from the Kaminoans' computers. And as for who the Mandalorians who attacked them were, well, that was again Bo-Katan's Night Owls, who at this time helped them because Ahsoka directly went to Bo-Katan. Because again, Ahsoka also helped Bo-Katan secure her position. But anyways, after reviewing the information that R2 collected, Anakin will find out about Order 66. And without wasting any time, Anakin would transmit this information to Mace and Yoda back on Coruscant. So back at the temple, not long after Anakin sends information about Order 66, Obi-Wan would return to the temple with a disguised Maul, as Obi-Wan determined that the temple would be the best place to keep Maul hidden. Or at least it was better than leaving Maul out on the streets of Coruscant. But anyways, after discussing everything, Mace, Yoda, and Obi-Wan would decide to end Sidious immediately, as the longer Sidious lived, the bigger the chances of the Jedi Order falling. Because with them now knowing about Order 66, the Jedi feels very much under threat. The clones are everywhere. If Palpatine were to execute this order, the Jedi would all be killed, the Masters would realize. So this would drive in the urgency of the situation. After they've destroyed Sidious and are taken to trial, they will testify before the Senate and the courts that they killed Sidious because he was the Sith Lord who orchestrated the Clone Wars, and also that the three Masters acted alone, without the approval of the other 9 High Council members. This was their plan. The Masters, of course, knew that the Senate was probably not going to believe them, but given the stakes, Yoda, Mace, and Obi-Wan essentially decide to sacrifice themselves. Yoda for the Jedi, Mace for the Republic, and Obi-Wan mostly to keep Anakin safe from the dark side. And having heard all this, Maul would also decide to join them. He wanted Sidious to too, and Maul would argue that if he too were with the Masters, then it would be easy to convince everyone that the three Masters had indeed gone rogue. And so, the three Masters and Maul, disguised as a clone trooper, would head on over to Palpatine's office to end him once and for all. So not long after the Masters and Maul go on this mission, Anakin would arrive back on Coruscant, and upon not finding the Masters in the temple, Anakin would immediately figure what most likely happened, and would race to the Chancellor's office. And in the meantime, Obi-Wan, Mace, Yoda, and Maul would walk into Sidious's office and confront him, which would turn into a fight, and although Palpatine or Sidious would try valiantly to fight off his foes, against the powers of Mace, Yoda, Obi-Wan, and his former apprentice, Sidious would fall. But before they could strike Sidious down, Anakin would rush into Sidious's office, at which point Sidious would call out to Anakin for help, making Anakin's earlier vision of Sidious real. Sidious would then try to convince Anakin to help him, but at this point Anakin would see that Sidious was just using him. Also, here, Anakin knows that Force visions are not absolutes. At the end of it all, he didn't need Sidious. But Sidious would keep trying to use his most powerful weapon, his words, to save himself. But finally, Maul, in his anger, would grab Sidious by his throat and would cut him in half, after which Maul would throw him out the glass window of Palpatine's office. So the rule of two would ultimately end with his last member being made into two pieces and thrown out of a window. So at this point, since 3 of the 12 Jedi High Council members have joined a galactic criminal to assassinate the leader of the Republic, what would happen next? Well, after all is said and done, seeing as how there is no escape from the situation because there are security recordings of the Masters walking into the building with a disguised Maul, the Masters would determine that surrender is the only option. Obi-Wan would then tell Anakin that he should call in the clone troopers and tell them that he, Anakin, was coming to the Chancellor's office on official duty when he ran into this. You are believed to be Palpatine's right hand, Anakin. You were his personal representative on the Jedi Council. They will believe you, Obi-Wan would say, wanting Anakin to be essentially left out of the legal mess that was about to follow. And so, even though he didn't feel comfortable doing it, Anakin would call in the clone troopers, saying that the Chancellor has been assassinated. Mace would then look at Yoda, who was gazing out at Coruscant, and ask him, "What will happen now, Master?" And without redirecting his gaze, Yoda would say, "Justified. Our actions might be in the eyes of the Force, but the laws of the Republic, different. They view such deeds. Trust in the Force. We must." As for Maul, he would be listening to all of this. He would consider jumping out the window in Sidious's office, but would quickly realize that even his robotic legs wouldn't save him from the fall. And also, due to the Senate building being an official government building, there was no air traffic allowed too close to it. So Maul would see that there won't be any speeders for him to grab onto if he jumped out. And on top of that, Maul also knew that there was far too much security inside the Senate building for him to fight off. So Maul would ultimately realize that he only had two options. He could fight and become one with the Force, or he could surrender and try to survive. And being the survivor that he was, Maul would choose the latter option. And immediately as Maul realized this, the clone troopers would walk into the Chancellor's office, and observing the scene, the clone commander would ask, "What happened here, sir? Where is the Supreme Chancellor?" "Dead, he is. Kill him. We did. A Sith he was." Yet I would say this with much conviction in his voice. So following this, the Jedi and Maul would be arrested. Anakin would tell officials that he had gone to the Chancellor's office on official business when he saw what happened and called the clones. This would be believed. Like Obi-Wan said, Anakin was believed to be the Chancellor's right hand, pretty much. And on top of that, there would also be holo recordings of Anakin walking in the Senate building, proving that he was none but the Masters and Maul. So following their arrest, Maul and the Jedi Masters would be placed in separate prison cells. And not long after this, an acting Chancellor of the Republic would be elected, and the trial of the Jedi would begin. But it would be Maul being placed on the stand first. Initially, based on everything that happened, there would be suspicion that the Jedi orchestrated Maul's escape. But since the Jedi essentially allowed him to kill Sidious, who Maul believed ruined his life, Maul would testify that Maul had his death-wise supporters free him. After which he went after Palpatine, and that he convinced the Jedi to join him after Obi-Wan Kenobi caught him. Maul would then be asked why he wanted Palpatine dead, to which Maul would say that Palpatine was the Sith Lord Darth Sidious and Maul's former Sith Master who abandoned him after a failed mission on Naboo 13 years prior, which would be something that Padme would be able to confirm as she had seen Maul on Naboo. Maul would then go over his training under Palpatine, Palpatine's plans to destroy the Jedi, and how Palpatine orchestrated the blockade of Naboo to be elected Chancellor. Basically, Maul would reveal everything that he knew. Maul would then be asked how exactly Darth Sidious was planning to destroy the Jedi and take over the Republic, to which Maul would say that he was not privy to those details. Following which, Maul would be asked if he had any proof to back up any of his claims, and Maul would of course have none. Sidious was always careful not to leave anything connecting him with Maul. So basically, Maul didn't have any solid evidence to prove his claims. And because of this, Maul's testimony would be seen as unreliable by the Senate and the courts. It would then be argued that Maul is a separatist agent who aided the separatists during the attack on Naboo, who now, with the treasonous Jedi Masters, have murdered the Chancellor. This scenario would be far more believable to most senators. Anyways, after Maul, Yoda, Mace, and Obi-Wan would all be tried, and they all would testify that Palpatine was a Sith and that he wanted to destroy the Jedi and take over the Republic. Yoda would even go over the 25,000-year-long history of the Jedi and the Sith, and the many wars that the two had fought in the past. But these would all be dismissed by the Senate as millennia-old tales that the Jedi were using to justify their treason. Also, side note, do keep in mind that Palpatine was loved by the Senate and the people of the Republic, who saw him as a strong, bold man who stood for democracy and peace. So it wouldn't be easy for them to believe that this man who they were essentially worshipping was a Sith Lord who caused the Clone Wars. And on top of this, as Chancellor Palpatine was loved, the Jedi, ever since the war began, had been losing favor among everyone, pretty much. Anyways, as all this is happening, Palpatine's lightsaber would be recovered and would be presented before the Senate. And the Jedi would argue that this lightsaber is proof of Palpatine being a trained Sith Lord. But many in the Senate would argue that the Jedi may have planted the lightsaber to make their treason look justifiable. And also that even if Palpatine were a Sith, that alone wouldn't be illegal. Which, by the way, was true. Simply being a Sith was not illegal in the Republic, as it stood in the time of the prequels. The novelization for Revenge of the Sith does confirm this. The Masters would then be asked if they had any actual solid evidence backing up any of their claims, and the Jedi would have none. Nothing other than Force visions and Maul's testimony, basically. Which, if it was 1,000 years ago when only Jedi held the position of Supreme Chancellor, well, back then, Force visions may have passed for solid evidence, but as things stood in the time of the prequels, Force visions weren't exactly considered evidence. So the Jedi basically had no legally acceptable evidence to back their claims. They would, however, bring up the incident with 5 stained Hidbar chips and Order 66, following which the Kaminoans would be summoned to the Galactic Senate to testify. And the Kaminoans would say that Order 66 is just one among 150 contingency orders put in place to maintain peace. The Kaminoans would also argue that there is also Order 65, which, if executed, can be used against the Chancellor of the Republic, like Order 66 against the Jedi. And the Senate would find this a reasonable explanation for Order 66. Palpatine was smart to never leave a trail, Yoda would think to himself as all this transpired. As for the rest of the Jedi Order, they would ultimately not be blamed for any of this, as it became clear that the 3 Masters had acted alone. Which actually wouldn't be a lie. Mace, Yoda, and Obi-Wan did not share their plan with anyone else, not even Anakin. And as for Anakin, he would be going through hell seeing all this happen. Anakin would be feeling helpless, and he also knew that Obi-Wan would most likely be executed with Yoda and Mace if the truth about Palpatine is not proven. But luckily, Anakin's worries would soon be taken away by an unlikely hero, I guess. So to explain who this hero was, let's turn our attention to the Separatist leaders who are on Mustafar as all this is happening. So after days of not receiving any messages or transmissions from Grievous or Sidious, the Separatist leaders would begin to worry. They had been experiencing a lot of defeats lately. That, coupled with the silence from both Grievous and Sidious, would lead some of the Separatist leaders, including Viceroy of the Trade Federation Newt Gunray, to consider if Sidious and Grievous had gone into hiding, realizing that the war is lost, leaving them, the leaders of the Separatist Alliance, to take the blame for everything and be sent to prison for life or be killed at the hands of the Jedi. So, a while later, Newt Gunray, now fully believing that the war is lost, would make a decision. He was not about to spend the rest of his life in a prison rotting away. And so, with that decided, the Viceroy would secretly contact the Republic and let them know where he and the other Separatist leaders were hiding out in exchange for amnesty. And so, immediately after receiving this information, the Republic forces would arrive on Mustafar and arrest all the Separatist leaders, following which they would be made to shut down the droid army. And at this moment, the Clone Wars would officially come to an end. So following this, all these Separatist leaders would be taken to Coruscant and placed in prison until their trials can begin. All except Newt Gunray. So all this would be happening around the same time that the Jedi trials were going on, and mainly because of this, Newt Gunray would be questioned on who exactly was behind the Separatist Alliance, and Gunray would say, "It was the Sith Lord, Darth Sidious." And following this revelation by Gunray, the Viceroy would be made to testify before the Senate of all he knew. And so, seeing as how this is the only way he could avoid prison, Newt Gunray would go over everything starting from the blockade of Naboo to now. Gunray would reveal that Sidious had been guiding them from the beginning. But when asked if Sidious was Palpatine, Gunray would say that neither he nor the other Separatist leaders were privy to the real identity of Sidious. But Gunray would say that Sidious was extremely powerful and quite possibly had significant influence over many senators in the Republic, as only someone with that kind of power would have been able to do many of the things that Sidious did, Gunray would say. So at this point, it would be proven that Sidious, a Sith, was behind everything. But in addition to this, Gunray would also make another important contribution to the investigation. Gunray would recognize Darth Maul as Sidious's apprentice, and would confirm that Maul was acting on behalf of Lord Sidious during the invasion of Naboo. And suddenly, Maul was not such an unreliable witness. So as the evidence mounted in support of the Jedi and Maul's claims, all thanks to Newt Gunray, the Senate would vote to launch a detailed investigation into Palpatine, during which the Jedi Masters will not be placed in prison. Instead, they would be sent to the Jedi Temple, and would essentially be placed under temple arrest, I suppose. The 3 Masters and Anakin would be satisfied with this decision. The Masters first because the Sith is gone, and Anakin, mostly because Obi-Wan, will not be executed now. As for Maul, however, since he committed many more crimes other than aiding in the assassination of the possible Sith Lord Palpatine, Maul will be placed back into prison. So in the end, when everything is said and done, the investigation will keep on going as Palpatine hid everything really well. But in the same time, the evidence in favor of the Jedi and Maul would also increase, as after their arrest, the other Separatist leaders would also repeat what Gunray said about Sidious and Maul's connection with Sidious. And over time, because of the mounting circumstantial evidence, most of the Senate and the citizens of the Republic in general would come to believe what the Jedi did was right. But there still remained a problem. Even if Palpatine was proven beyond a shadow of a doubt to be Darth Sidious, the Jedi would still be guilty of extrajudicial killing. But the Jedi cannot be punished for that until the investigation is complete, until the Senate has a full picture on whether Palpatine was actually Sidious. So all of this combined would leave things in a state of limbo. But ultimately, with the Separatists defeated, the Clone Wars over, and with the Sith gone, the galaxy would essentially begin to heal. Over time, as the investigation to Palpatine kept going on without finding anything, it would slowly begin to be forgotten. And basically, a new era of the Republic would begin. The Jedi, though humbled by their experiences, continue to serve as guardians of peace, guided by the lessons learned from this tumultuous chapter in their history. So that would essentially be the general outline of what would happen. The Jedi Order would survive, Mace and Obi-Wan would be on temple arrest, most likely for the rest of their lives, and the galaxy at large would eventually forget and move on, with the return of the Sith now unlikely to happen anytime soon, which would be an acceptable outcome for the Jedi. But what about Anakin and Padme? Well, like Yoda said, the future is always in motion, and due to the change in tide in this new timeline, Padme wouldn't die. Luke and Leia would be born on Coruscant and not Naboo, because with all the legal proceedings that were going on, neither Padme nor Anakin could go to Naboo like Padme wanted. As Luke and Leia grew older, it would become clear that they were immensely powerful in the Force, but since even this renewed Jedi Order forbade attachments, Anakin and Padme would decide to not surrender their children to the Jedi Order. Instead, Luke and Leia will grow up in royalty and luxury on Naboo, and as they grew up, they will be instructed in the ways of the Force by Anakin. But Anakin and Padme's marriage, however, would still remain a secret, as given the state of things, Anakin couldn't really leave the Jedi Order, nor did he really want to, especially after he was made Master, and given one of the council seats that were left empty after Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Mace were forced to be removed from the council. As for Ahsoka, with the help of Bo-Katan, eventually she would make her way back to Coruscant and would rejoin the Order as Anakin's apprentice. And as for Anakin and Obi-Wan's friendship, it would become stronger, because Anakin would see that everything Obi-Wan did was mostly to keep him, Anakin, safe. And eventually, even though Anakin didn't tell them, Ahsoka and Obi-Wan would figure that Luke and Leia, Padme's children, were Anakin's. But as always, Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka would pretend that Obi-Wan and Ahsoka didn't know about this, for everyone's sake, as they believed. And so, in the end, there would be peace in the galaxy, and the Chosen One would finally have a family and be happy. Anyways, that's it. Have a good day, good night, or good evening. Stay hydrated, and I will see you in the next video, which would be called, What If Palpatine Did Death Sticks?